Chapter 1. The Blueprint. In the underbelly of Los Angeles, where freeways tangle like veins and warehouses pulse with money no one ever saw twice, Alan Pace III was a ghost in the machine. Every day. He walked the same fluorescent-lit halls of Dunbar armored like a man born to the hum of circuits and steel. He wore his security inspector's badge with the disinterest of someone who knew the system better than it knew itself. Cameras nodded as he passed. Guards joked about late poker nights. No one looked twice when he took a few extra minutes at the vault controls, jotting down notes in a clipboard that hid more secrets than his smile. But Alan saw everything. The blind spots, the lazy guards, the cracks in protocol. The Dunbar facility on Mateo Street moved millions in cash each week, money headed for ATMs, grocery chains, banks, all compressed into bricks, wrapped in heat-sealed plastic, and locked behind steel thicker than most vaults in Fort Knox. And yet the most dangerous man inside it all wasn't armed. He carried nothing but access and intent. He was, as he liked to think of himself, perfectly placed. It had started as a thought experiment, like most crimes do. What would it take to rob this place? A question Alan asked himself in idle moments, tapping patterns into the security panel, noting the delayed response of motion sensors in hallway C, the slow reaction time of Gary during night watch, the exact duration it took for the vault timer to finish cycling once unlocked. It was never fantasy. It was study. Eventually, it became design. By early August, Alan's blueprint had taken shape. 4 men, 1 truck, a 30-minute window, a 12-step plan with 96 contingencies. Each variable weighed against human behavior, camera lag, and shift changes. But plans required people, and people were risk. That's when Alan made his biggest gamble. Not on the system, but on the people he chose to bring in. He didn't want professionals. Professionals bragged. Professionals left breadcrumbs. Alan needed loyalty, not experience. People who owed him. People he could control. People who wouldn't break unless he did first. He found them in the same South Central streets he'd grown up on. Eugene Lamar Hill was the first, a former linebacker turned truck mechanic. Alan had known him since 6th grade. Eugene was a muscle, tactical, level-headed, and quietly terrifying when the moment called for it. Eric Boyd, hot-headed and sharp-tongued, had a temper that worried Alan, but he was reliable when it came to pressure. He also had a way of moving fast and quiet that came from years in the backrooms of car clubs and under-the-table delivery gigs. Freddie Rouse was the brain behind the screens. Tech-savvy and socially withdrawn, he could reroute LAPD scanner traffic through a piece of wire and a broken answering machine. He spoke in code, lived in headphones, and trusted no one but Alan. Terry Brown was a wild card, loyal to the bone, jittery under stress, but Alan had pulled him out of a ditch once when they were kids. Terry would follow Alan into hell if asked, and maybe they were. And then there was Thomas Johnson, Alan's cousin, the driver, ice in his veins, nerves like piano wire. If anyone could disappear a truck full of money into the shadows of L.A. before sunrise, it was Thomas. They met in fragments, always in motion. In parked cars, on construction sites, in barber shops with loud clippers running. Alan passed out burner phones like communion wafers. Each call or text used a short code. Ghost, it always began. Their name for the job. The perfect crime, unseen. No one dared to say robbery. It felt too small. This wasn't smash and grab. This was orchestration. On the surface, Alan continued his job at Dunbar, clocking in every afternoon and blending in like wallpaper. But after hours, his mind ticked like a metronome. He and Freddie mapped camera angles down to the inch. Eugene broke into scrap yards to find an unregistered box truck. Eric staked out the shifts. Terry saw stolen plates, bleach, gloves, black coveralls. Every detail obsessed over. Every second accounted for. To Alan, it felt less like plotting a crime and more like conducting a symphony. He was a maestro, and the city was his stage. But symphonies don't play themselves. One Thursday night, the week before it would all begin, Alan gathered them for a final in-person briefing. The only time all six were together in the same room. It was inside an abandoned upholstery shop off Common Avenue. Dust hung in the air. The walls were tagged. Outside, a train groaned by. Alan stood by a whiteboard, chalk in one hand, stopwatch in the other. No names once we begin. No cell phones. No guns unless absolutely necessary, he said, locking eyes with Eugene on that last point. No hero moments, he added, and looked at Eric. 30 minutes. We're ghosts. In, out, clean. If we mess up even once, it's not 5 years, it's life. He walked them through the map again. How he'd kill the security cameras from inside. How the guards would be distracted or incapacitated. Where they'd load the cash. Where the decoys would go. They'd use stolen vehicles. Switch plates. Burn the truck after the drop. Use bleach for surfaces. Heat seal the evidence. No die packs. No marked bills. Only hundreds and 20s. Once we walk out, we don't talk. We disappear for 6 months. No spending. Not a dime more than normal. You change nothing about your life until I say otherwise. That last part didn't sit well with Terry. What's the point of 18 million if we're living like we're still broke? He asked. Alan didn't flinch. The point, he said, is to not get caught. The room fell into silence again. Not out of fear, but reverence. This wasn't just a heist. It was a resurrection. For all of them. On the outside, there were ghosts already, black men in a system that didn't see them unless it was behind glass or through bars. This job wasn't theft. It was reclamation. They weren't robbing Dunbar. They were taking back power. The night before the job, Alan sat alone in his apartment, a single lamp glowing over his desk. On the corkboard above, every detail of the plan was pinned with military precision. Doodles of hallway maps, codes for the locks, bank tags on the bills, every name of every guard on the graveyard shift. He pulled them down one by one, burning the papers in a metal coffee can, watching them curl into black petals. Then he stared at the last item, a Polaroid of him and his father. Church clothes, summer heat, no money in their pockets, but smiles on their faces. Alan touched the corner of the photo and closed his eyes. In 6 hours, he would be inside the vault. In 7, he would either be a legend or just another name buried beneath a case file. Chapter 2, The Vault. Friday night bled into early Saturday morning as Los Angeles slipped into its uneasy quiet, a lull broken only by the distant growl of freeways, the flicker of neon signs, and the occasional helicopter drone overhead. It was September 12th, 1997. But to Alan Pace, it was 0 hour. He'd walked out of the Dunbar facility at 9:45 p.m. sharp, like always, flashing his badge and offering a casual wave to the guard in the booth. No suspicion. No tension. He looked like a man clocking out after another long, unremarkable shift. In his trunk sat everything they'd need. Black coveralls, gloves, radios, zip ties, a duffel bag with 6 masks, matte black, expressionless, not theatrical, not flashy, no clown grins or skulls, just clean anonymity. By 10:20 p.m., Alan pulled into the shadow of a closed auto shop off Imperial Highway. The others were already there, waiting in the dark like hounds just released from their chains. Freddie sat cross-legged on a milk crate, fiddling with the scanner equipment one last time. Terry was pacing. Eugene leaned against the van, calm as ice, chewing gum. Thomas double-checked the truck, a rented white box van with fake Dunbar decals affixed to the side. Inside that van were two things. Clean bins for the money and a silence thick enough to choke on. Alan stepped into their circle, voice low and clipped. This is it. No one spoke. Nods were enough. They all knew what was at stake. He looked at each of them in turn. Once we move, we move. No talking unless it's on comms. Once we're in the yard, we're ghosts. They suited up, masks on, gloves pulled tight, radios checked. The van rumbled to life and pulled out into the night. 5 men inside. Alan rode in a separate car, his personal sedan already parked at a secondary exit, ready for escape. By 11:50 p.m., the Dunbar facility sat in view. Concrete, security fences, cameras that moved like sleepy eyes. The last armored truck had returned from its delivery route just an hour earlier. The vault would now be loaded with tens of millions. Weekend distribution for Southern California banks. They parked in the back, just behind a semi-truck that conveniently blocked their van from view of the main road. Alan moved first. He'd kept his employee key card, officially scheduled to be turned in next week. Unofficially, it was their golden ticket. He passed through the side personnel door and walked the halls as if he never left. He moved through familiar corridors like muscle memory, silent, precise. Cameras tracked him, but he knew their arc. He slid just beneath their sweep, like a thread through a needle. The main security office was 2 doors down. Inside Gary, a weekend guard with wandering mind and slower reflexes, sat watching monitors half drowsy, the other half distracted by a late-night Lakers rerun. He didn't even look up as Alan walked in. "You left something?" Gary asked, not looking away from the screen. "Yeah," Alan replied, stepping behind him. One strike. Fast. Surgical. Gary slumped sideways, unconscious but alive. Alan flipped open the main breaker cabinet and reached for the manual override switch. A practice movement. He disabled 3 key cameras: the yard, the loading bay, and interior vault hallway. The system blinked once, then flatlined. To the rest of the world, Dunbar had just gone dark. Alan spoke into his radio. "Go." Within 20 seconds, the back door creaked open and Eugene led the team in. Silhouettes in black, rifles slung low, not to shoot, only to intimidate. The message was clear: don't resist and no one gets hurt. They moved like a tide. Smooth, silent. 3 more guards were inside. 1 in the lounge. 1 making rounds. 1 outside near the garage. Each was neutralized in seconds. Tied, Gag moved to the break room. Calmly, efficiently, Alan had time to shift change. There was no rotation for another 40 minutes. That was the window. 30 minutes in. 10 to vanish. The vault's outer door required a time delay. 10 minutes exactly from activation to unlock. Alan entered the code and pressed a button. The sequence began. A mechanical hum echoed. Then the countdown started. 10 minutes. Every second was accounted for. While the lock cycled, Freddie ran a hard line into the security terminal and began looping external footage from earlier in the day. To the outside world, it would look like nothing was happening. Eric and Eugene started clearing the cash bins left stacked from the day's pickups. Unprocessed, uncounted, and untraceable. Bundles of hundreds and 20s. Brick after brick of raw currency. Each man moved with purpose, like ants raiding a feast. They filled the bins inside the van. Terry tagged each with coded labels and checked off items on a notepad. 9 minutes. Then 8. Alan stood watch of the vault, gun slung low, listening to the locks churn. His heartbeat was a metronome. No sweat, no hesitation. This was his cathedral. The vault door hissed open like a dragon breathing its last. Steel groaned. Air pressure shifted. And there it was. The room was stacked floor, the ceiling with pallets of cash. Bundled. Neat. So much money it felt abstract. This was more than wealth. It was empire. Allen took a single moment to stare. Then he snapped back. Start with the south wall. Pre-sort racks. They moved like dancers, orchestrated and sharp. They knew the drill. Thousands of pounds of currency transferred by hand. It wasn't everything. That would have been impossible. But Allen's research had revealed where the most valuable, least traceable stacks were kept. Eugene manned the intake. Eric and Thomas passed bins. Terry recorded the order. Freddie handled backup surveillance. The van was halfway full by minute 20. At minute 27, Allen called it. That's it. Go. No hesitation. No greed. They sealed the bins. Freddie wiped the system. Terry dumped a trail of counterfeit evidence. Fake prints, false exit patterns, misdirected clues. The guards were left unharmed. No one had been shot. No alarms triggered. The city slept on. The crew vanished as fast as they came. The van turned down 7th Street, cut through an alley, and disappeared behind a shipping container 2 miles south, where a second vehicle, an identical model with clean plates, waited in silence. They transferred the bins, set fire to the first van in a secluded lot. No explosion, just slow burn, all trace gone. By the time the fire department was called, the crew was already scattered. Allen returned to his apartment, stripped out his suit, and showered in silence. He scrubbed his hands until the skin reddened. Then he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart steady. He didn't feel elated. He felt empty. Satisfied, but not triumphant. This was the cleanest robbery in U.S. history. No noise, no mess. $18.9 million gone in 30 minutes. And not a soul hurt. But perfection has a price, and it had only just been paid. Chapter 3. Smoke and Silence. Los Angeles woke up that Saturday with no clue it had just been the stage for the biggest cash heist in American history. The sun rose on strip malls and coffee shops like always. News vans buzzed with usual weekend chatter. Traffic jams, football previews, rising gas prices. No mention of Dunbar. No breaking alerts. Just calm. The crew had done their job too well. At 6:12 a.m., the first call came in. A maintenance worker arriving early, spotting the broken back gate and the scorched husk of a delivery van down by Alameda Street. By the time LAPD arrived, the scene at Dunbar was clean. Too clean. Inside, guards were shaken but physically unharmed. The vault stood cracked open, its contents eviscerated. Surveillance footage? Gone. Alarms? Never tripped. It looked, as one officer muttered, like the damn wind blew through and took the money with it. In truth, $18.9 million in cold. Untraceable cash had vanished without a shot fired. No blood. No bullets. Just silence. The FBI was on scene by noon. Special Agent Lisa Cafferty arrived in a Navy suit and sunglasses, sipping burnt coffee and scanning the site with predator's eyes. A seasoned agent from Chicago, she'd transferred to L.A. after a decade of watching white-collar criminals vanish into gated communities. This job was different. Sloppiness didn't live here. This wasn't an impulse, she muttered to herself as she walked the perimeter. This was military. Inside the facility, she stood in the gutted vault and listened to the hum of emptiness. Someone knew the timing, the codes, the layout, she said aloud. This wasn't just an inside job. This was someone raised inside. From that moment, Allen Pace 3 was on her radar. And outside the glass walls of the FBI's rising suspicion, Allen sat at home, watching the coverage unfold on television. He sipped water from a glass and tried to control his pulse. His face was blank. He didn't blink. It had begun. The crew had gone aground. They followed Allen's post-heist rules to the letter. No contact, no cash, no deviation. Each man went back to life as if nothing had changed. Eric returned to his job detailing cars. He cleaned minivans and soccer mom SUVs with the same hands that had lifted over $3 million just days ago. The money sat buried under his cousin's crawl space in Southgate, wrapped in trash bags, sealed with lime to kill scent. Eugene stayed at his garage job, fixing brakes and changing oil. At night, he watched game tape of old football matches, trying not to imagine how he'd spend the money. He dreamed a property in Texas, a gym with his name on the sign. But dreaming was dangerous. He knew that. Freddie vanished into the digital mist, moving to a cheap motel under a fake name. He left no online trace. He burned his phone, ate gas station sandwiches, and listened to police frequencies for hours. He could feel the net tightening, even if no one else could. Terry couldn't sit still. The weight of silence cracked at him like dry rot. He worked at a loading dock, but his nerves twitched with every siren that passed. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced the door was about to be kicked in. Only Thomas kept cool. He bought a used car with clean cash, visited his mother like always, and told no one a thing. If guilt touched him, it never showed. And Allen returned to the void. He declined new job offers, said he needed a mental reset. He paid rent early, drove his old car, bought groceries with a debit card. He lived like a man who'd lost his direction, not gained a fortune. Inside his apartment closet, the cash sat stacked behind a false wall, perfectly packed, untouched. It wasn't just money. It was a test. How long could they last? But cracks appear not just in plans, they bloom in people. And the first one started with Terry. 2 months after the heist, his sister's boyfriend caught him flashing $100 bills in a corner bar in Inglewood. Too drunk, too loud, he tipped a waitress $$ $300 in cash. A guy in a white tee asked where it came from. Terry smirked and said something about ghost money. That was the first whisper. Word traveled. Someone knew someone who said Terry had come into cash. Someone else said it looked like Fed paper. An old co-worker mentioned Dunbar. The math didn't have to be precise to be dangerous. By November, Agent Cafferty had assembled a full task force. She interviewed every current and former Dunbar employee from the past year. Allen met her across a steel table at the Federal Building in Westwood. He smiled, played polite, told her he'd been with family that weekend, gave names, offered to help, said he was just as shocked as anyone. She nodded, listened, watched his eyes. When he left, she stared at the printout of his file. No priors. Clean record. Good employee. But something was off. You ever seen a man try too hard not to lie? She asked her partner. Allen hadn't slipped, but he hadn't blinked either. That made him dangerous. Winter brought rain. Cold. Restlessness. The crew began to itch. No one had touched their share. No cars. No chains. No new homes. But the silence had weight. The money became a presence in their lives. Unseen, untouchable, a pressure cooker with no release valve. Freddie was the first to call for a meeting. They met in a closed warehouse under the 110 freeway. No masks, no weapons, just them. Freddie's voice was low but sharp. We need to decide how long this ghost act lasts. I can't keep circling scanners for the next 10 years. Allen stayed calm. We're not burning 18 million for a short high. Eric scoffed. We're not monks either. It's been months. Allen turned, voice colder than before. And you think a Rolex now won't bring a badge to your door by morning? One of us slips, we all burn. Eugene nodded. We didn't come this far to get stupid now. But Tension filled the air like gasoline vapor. They all felt it, the weight of waiting, the fear that the real risk wasn't behind them. It was now. By January, the pressure hit its boiling point. Terry made the call. He reached out to a friend, small-time crook, owed him a favor. He needed help laundering just a few thousand, just to breathe a little. The friend said sure. The friend also said something else, something that ended up in the hands of the FBI. That's how it began, with a whisper. The perfect crime had lasted 4 months. Now it was unraveling. Chapter 4, The First Slip. The phone call came at 8:42 a.m. on a clear January morning. Special Agent Lisa Cafferty picked it up, barely balancing a half-eaten bagel between her teeth and a stack of surveillance reports under her arm. FBI Cafferty. The voice on the line was hesitant. Young, Mayo, I got something you'll want to hear. It's about Dunbar. Cafferty's bagel hit the trash. He called himself Marco. Said he didn't want trouble. Just wanted to clear his conscience. Said a guy he knew, someone named Terry Brown, had suddenly come into cash, showed up with stacks of hundreds, started asking about washing a few bands. Marco didn't know details, but he knew enough. Cafferty pressed. What makes you think this is Dunbar money? A pause, because he said he hit a jackpot, and he smiled when I said the word armored. She didn't need more. The FBI had already run Terry's name. He was part of Alan Pace's social circle, worked near the facility, grew up with Pace and Compton. Now the circle was shrinking. That afternoon, the Bureau pulled his financials. No bank activity, smart, but his phone record showed 24 burner numbers, all active post-September 1997. And one of them pinged off a cell tower less than 2 blocks from the Dunbar facility at exactly 12:07 a.m. the night of the robbery. That was enough. The noose had its first knot. Cafferty issued a quiet surveillance order. She wanted eyes, not cuffs. Not yet. We watch, she told her team. Because if he's part of it, he's not alone. And I want them all. Back on the streets. Terry had no idea he'd just shattered the wall. He thought he'd played it smart. The guy he talked to, Marco, was no snitch, right? He'd only offloaded a few thousand. Just enough to get his car fixed, buy his mom a heater, stash the rest. Still hadn't touched the big pile. But paranoia began to creep in. He felt in the way a Crown Vic slowed outside his house. In the way the grocery clerk glanced twice when he paid with crisp hundreds. In the fact that Eugene had stopped returning calls. By the end of the week, Terry cracked. He showed up unannounced at Alan's apartment, pounding on the door like a man on fire. Alan opened a half an inch, eyes narrowed. Are you out of your mind? They're watching me, Terry hissed. I can feel it. Alan pulled him inside, locked the door, and drew the blinds. Who's watching? I don't know. Feds? LAPD? Someone. I shouldn't have gone to Marco. Alan's silence spoke volumes. You what? It was just a few grand. He knows people. I needed to flip it, just a little. Alan stepped forward, his voice a scalpel. You broke the rule. I was careful. There's no such thing. Terry's hand shook. You don't get it, man. I wake up thinking today's the day. That someone's going to knock on my door and end it. Alan leaned in close. Then disappear. Lay low. Delete your number. Don't talk to anyone, not even me. You so much as breathe in the wrong direction, and you'll get us all buried. Terry left shaking. Alan didn't sleep that night. The first domino had tipped. Meanwhile, Eugene had been watching signs. He was always the quiet one, the analyst. He didn't talk unless there was something to say. And what he saw now didn't look good. News about the Dunbar heist had surged again. FBI closing in. New leads. Insiders suspected. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was consistent. At the garage, he started noticing unmarked cars parking across the street. New customers asking strange questions. One even tried to pay with marked bills. He stopped showing up the next week. He called Alan from a payphone outside a 7-Eleven, his voice low and cold. "We've got heat." Alan didn't argue. "Do you still have everything?" "Untouched." "Then you burn her out. Disappear, just like we planned." "What about you?" "I'm already gone." He hung up before Eugene could answer. Alan had a go bag. Always had. Inside it, fake ID, burner phone, passport, cash, SIM cards. He prepared for this moment since day one. Not because he didn't trust the others, but because he didn't trust life. But even now, with the FBI circling, he wasn't ready to run. Not yet. There was one more thing to fix. The next blow came from Freddie. Always the tech head. Always the quiet brain. But solitude had made him paranoid, and paranoia makes men sloppy. One night, trying to test a theory, Freddie searched something dangerous on a public computer at a library. Statute of Limitations, Armored Robbery, California. It was a dumb question. The FBI flagged it within 48 hours. By the time they pulled the IP, the terminal, and a grainy security photo, they had a face. Freddie wasn't hard to trace. They found his burner apartment in East Hollywood. Empty, but the walls held fingerprints. A Leighton on the window matched a Dunbar employee from 1996. The net pulled tighter. Cafferty smiled when the match came in. That's 3. The next morning, she ordered full surveillance on Alan Pace. Alan had always known it would end like this. Not in fire, not in blood, but in the slow creep of time, the way walls closed in not with a crash, but a whisper. Still, he had one card left. He called a number no one else had. A fixer he'd met through an ex, someone who moved people out of bad cities for a fee. He said only 3 words. "It's time. Tonight." The response was simple. "You know the price." Alan did. He pulled 6 bricks of cash from the hidden wall, $600,000. Clean, wrapped, cold. He packed a duffel, left the rest untouched, and walked out his apartment at 3:14 a.m., slipping into a black car idling down the block. The city didn't notice, but Cafferty's team did. She was already in a car 2 blocks away when the signal came in. Target has left the building. The hunt had begun. Chapter 5. Shadows on the Run. Alan Pace always knew the difference between running and disappearing. Running was what corner store robbers did. Panic, adrenaline, bad choices, flashing lights. Running was reactive. Disappearing? That was different. That took discipline, timing, foresight, and more than anything else, a total commitment to silence. So when he slipped into the back seat of the black Nissan that morning, he wasn't panicked. He was precise. The driver didn't say a word, just merged onto the 405 with the calm of someone who'd done this before. By the time the sun rose over Los Angeles, Alan Pace, former security inspector, mastermind of the largest cash heist in U.S. history, was gone, vanished into machine he'd spent a year building for just this moment. But as he disappeared, the machine behind him groaned under the weight of stress, betrayal, and the invisible hand of the FBI. Because while Alan may have known how to vanish, the rest of his crew was falling apart, and the feds were ready. Terry Brown didn't see the vans coming. He stepped out of his sister's house just after 10 a.m. on a Thursday, holding a half-eaten breakfast burrito, when the world exploded into blue windbreakers and shouted orders. FBI, hands in the air. He dropped the burrito and ran. It lasted 7 seconds. Pinned to the pavement, cuffed and sweating, Terry kept repeating the same words. "I didn't do nothing. I don't know anything." They brought him into the federal building downtown. A concrete box, fluorescent lights, 2 chairs, 1 table. No clock, just time. Agent Lisa Cafferty stepped in with a file under her arm. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She just laid out what they knew. He'd talked to Marco. He'd flashed cash. A phone registered his cousin had pinged near Dunbar on the night of the robbery. And someone smarter than him, had already disappeared. Then she opened a manila folder and laid down the final card. A photo of Alan Pace. Terry stared. "Tell me you didn't know him," Cafferty said, calm as ice. Terry cracked. It started with the small things. Vague references. Half admissions. By the 3rd hour, he was giving them times, names, even the blueprints Alan had drawn for them. Not the originals, but sketches he'd kept in his head. "Alan planned it all," he whispered, eyes hollow. He was the brain. They had their link, but they weren't done. They let Terry go, not because he was clean, but because he was useful. Cafferty knew the key to collapsing a crew was doubt, and now Terry was radioactive. Once word got out that he'd been picked up and let go, the others would panic. She knew Alan wouldn't come back. That wasn't the play. But the rest? They were starting to fracture. So the feds dropped just enough bait. A leaked news story ran the next day in the Times. FBI believes key suspect in Dunbar robbery has fled city. Sources say inside informant cooperating. It was pure gas on a dry field. By that weekend, Freddie was gone. No note, no trail. Just vanished from his motel like a ghost. Eric, meanwhile, did the opposite. He showed up at a cousin's house in Hawthorne, shaking, twitchy, smelling like stress. "They're coming," he whispered. I saw the vans. The cousin, who had a prior himself, wanted no part of it. He made a call, not to the feds, but to Eugene. "He's melting, man." Eugene didn't answer, but he didn't have to. He was already preparing for his own kind of war. Of all the crew, Eugene was the one least likely crack. He was disciplined, tactical, former college ball player turned mechanic. Loyalty ran deep in his bones. But even he had limits. The pressure was unrelenting. Every shadow looked like a badge. Every phone call sounded like surveillance. When he got word about Terry's arrest, he didn't ask if it was true. He just started moving money. His stash, close to $3.2 million, was buried behind his aunt's property, wrapped in vacuum-sealed plastic under 5 feet of dirt. He'd always planned to sit on it for years. Now he started packing it up, not to spend it, to hide it better. He bought an old van with cash, repainted it himself, rewired the taillights, swapped the plates. He loaded the bags in at midnight and drove until dawn, deep into the California desert. Outside Barstow, he found an abandoned shipping container behind a long-dead truck stop. He buried the bags under concrete slabs. Only then did he breathe. But back in L.A., Cafferty wasn't waiting for someone to confess. She wanted to corner them all. So she picked the weakest link. Freddie had gone to Vegas. He used an alias, Derek Sims, and paid cash for everything. Rented a weekly motel. Bought a burner. Gambled a little. Drank a lot. He figured he could ride out for a few months until things cooled down. But the FBI was already there. They'd tracked his last known burner to a call he made at a Greyhound station on the night he fled. It was triangulated between 2 towers leading toward Nevada. By the time he checked into his second motel near Henderson, they had him, but they didn't arrest him. They offered him a deal. "You talk," said Cafferty over phone call arranged through a local agent, "and maybe you don't die in prison." Freddie didn't fold right away. But after 3 days of no sleep, hearing news reports about Alan being gone and whispers of Terry talking, he finally called back. "I'll give you everything," he said. "And in return, I get to walk." Cafferty didn't blink. You get to live. The next week was a blur. The FBI raided Eugene's garage, found a few thousand in marked bills, enough to hold him. They picked up Eric at a cousin's apartment. He didn't resist, just sat down on the porch and cried. Terry vanished, likely out of fear for what the others might do if they saw him again. Freddie signed a full statement. And Thomas, the last man of the original 6, he was nowhere to be found. But they'd get him too. Cafferty stood in front of the whiteboard in her war room. 6 names written in red marker. 5 were crossed out. Only Alan Pace remained. The one who planned it. The one who vanished. Chapter 6. The Ghost and the Trap. 3 months had passed since Alan Pace vanished. Los Angeles had moved on, but the FBI hadn't. Agent Lisa Cafferty kept a photo of Alan pinned to the whiteboard in her office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Every time she stared at it, she thought, you were too careful, but not perfect. Nobody is. The crew had unraveled, almost neatly, like a wire slowly pulled from a spool. Freddie had flipped. Eugene was awaiting trial. Eric barely spoke above a whisper in holding. And Terry, the initial leak, had requested federal protection, but still no sign of Alan. Then, like a signal in the dark, a whisper came from the other side of the border. A customs officer flagged a passport at the Tijuana crossing. Fake name, altered barcode. It passed a scanner, but didn't match the internal database. The man had turned away before inspection. He looked like Alan Pace. The surveillance footage was grainy, but Cafferty recognized the body language. Measured, cautious, trained. Alan hadn't just fled. He was maneuvering. But why come back? That question gnawed at her. People like Alan don't return without a reason. She ordered round-the-clock surveillance at every known associate's address, including old co-workers, high school classmates, and even a woman Alan had dated briefly back in 1993. Something told her this wasn't over. Alan was in San Diego, tucked away in a lower-end apartment under the name Mark Jennings. The ID was solid, bought through the same network he used to plan the heist. He worked under the table at a warehouse, moving crates for cash, living like a ghost. But ghosts don't dream, and Alan was dreaming again. The plan in his mind had been airtight. Hit the vault, take the cash, disappear, lay low until the heat cooled. 5 years, maybe more, then piece by piece, re-enter life with a legacy. But the plan hadn't accounted for human weakness. Terry's mouth, Freddie's paranoia, Eric's nerves. And now, Eugene had vanished from court, skipping bail with half the heat of the West Coast on his trail. The cracks weren't small anymore. They were fault lines. Alan stood in the apartment kitchen, staring at the duffel bag on the counter. Still sealed, still full. He had nearly $1.6 million left, untouched. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about something deeper. Control. He had to finish it, or bury it for good. Across town, Eugene was holed up in a storage unit outside Joshua Tree. He hadn't run for the thrill. He ran because the system was rigged. Freddie's betrayal had lit the fuse. If they were all going down, Eugene didn't want to sit in a cold courtroom and wait for the gavel. He wanted leverage. He had his piece of the haul, $3.2 million, still clean, and he had records, notes, dates, even a coded version of Alan's blueprints in a notepad, hidden inside an old mechanic's manual. He didn't want to use it, but if the FBI came again, he would. He turned on a burner phone and texted a number he hadn't used in 6 months. You need to fix this. No name, no signature. But Alan would understand. Cafferty had been watching one address in Carson, California, for 2 weeks. It belonged to a woman named Nadine Clark, former receptionist at Dunbar, briefly linked to Alan in '95. A camera caught her taking groceries from a man in a hoodie. Tall, athletic build, face obscured. But his gait, his shoulders, the way he scanned the street before knocking. It was Alan. No doubt. They couldn't move yet. She needed him in a catchable position. So she waited. For days later, Alan returned. This time, he entered the house and stayed for nearly 40 minutes. Cafferty didn't hesitate. "Seal the block," she said into her radio. "No lights, no noise. We bring him in quiet." But by the time they breached the front door, Alan was gone. The back door was open. So was a panel in the neighbor's fence. He'd slipped through their fingers again. But this time, he left something behind. A single envelope on Nadine's kitchen table. Inside was a list. 6 names. His crew, their shares, dates, and one line scrawled at the bottom. "We all chose this." Cafferty stared at the handwriting. It wasn't a confession. It was a message. He was still playing. Alan knew the clock was ticking. Eugene's message had confirmed what he already feared. The crew was in pieces, and the FBI had more than enough to tighten the net. But he wasn't going to run again. He was going to disappear on his terms. So he went back to where it started, the old Dunbar facility. It had closed 2 months after the robbery, rebranded, moved to a new location. But the bones of the building still stood, stripped of guards, but not of ghosts. Alan parked a block away, under the shroud of 2 a.m. silence, and walked up the alley to the east loading bay. It was rusted shut. He didn't try to enter. He just stood there. It was where it had all begun, where he'd slipped past cameras, knew every step of the blind spot route, where he'd turned a floor plan into a fortune and a group of friends into fugitives. Now it felt like a tomb. He left another envelope there, taped beneath the rusting emergency lock. Inside it, a USB, encrypted, buried under 2 layers of false directories. On that drive was everything. The plan, the shifts, the mistakes, the maps. It was both his confession and his epitaph. He texted a number. Dunbar/Backgate/2 a.m. /leave it clean. Then he tossed the burner into the sewer. Cafferty got the call 30 minutes later. A municipal worker found the envelope while cleaning up graffiti tags along the old alley wall. When the team opened the USB, she didn't need to guess. It was Alan, pure Alan, his voice on a small .mp4 file, calm and steady. "You want the truth? Here it is. I took it. I planned it, because you left the gates wide open and I walked through. No guns, no blood, just precision. You can chase shadows, or you can take this and end it. But know this, you'll never find me, and you'll never get it back." It was the closest thing to closure the Bureau would ever get.